Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by cinematographer Luke Miller, who helped bring Grace and Frankie to the screen. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Hi, glad to be here.
I guess so. My first question is because you started off as a gaffer on Grace and Frankie, and a lot of cinematographers, or a lot of young cinematographers want to make that jump from either gaffer, or electric to cinematographer on a project. So how did you make that transition?
Sure. Well, unfortunately for everyone, it's a different path for each person. So I can just, I can describe how it went for me. But over the years, I worked on various shows as an electrician, as a best boy, as a gaffer, as a rigging gaffer, and was always sort of keeping my eye on what was the cinematographer doing, how was the DP thinking, and I always tried to think, what is my boss doing? Why are they doing that? And how can I anticipate that? How can I think ahead? And I think that was very helpful because over the years, when I was an electrician, the gaffer would lean heavily on me. When I was a gaffer, the DP would collaborate more with me because I was more involved in what he was thinking, what he was doing, or she. So on Grace and Frankie, I was hired on as the gaffer in the very first episode by Gail Tattersall, the DP. And from the beginning, he made it very clear he was going to be very collaborative and include me in basically everything that he did, which was really a fantastic experience for me because not only was he collaborating, but he was basically becoming a very great mentor for me. I was there for the first camera test. We were deciding which cameras to use, and we developed how we lit the show together. So that was very, very instrumental. And so as the seasons went by, Gail was very busy shooting every single episode, and he didn't have any time for prep. He didn't have any time to scout, for instance, with the incoming directors. And the Randall Winston, our producer at the time, had suggested to him that we bring in someone to cover for a couple of days while he could scout or take some meetings with the incoming directors just to do some prep work. And Gail, really said, it's got to be Luke. There's really no other way to do it. You can't bring somebody else in and try to learn how we liked the show, how we liked Jane and Lily. Anybody would just sort of come in and either have to start over or sort of turn to Luke and say, what should we do here? And so it was really, that was, I think, the beginning, Gail really supporting me and saying, you need to have Luke do that, take that role. And over the years, I had a great relationship with all our directors that came in and the writers and the showrunners and the executives. So they trusted me also. It wasn't just one person's trust. It was sort of everyone on the show, sort of very family environment. So with everyone's support, really, I was able to step in and at first just sort of cover for a day or two per episode. While Gail would go and scout, I would shoot the day's work. And while it was a really great experience, but then I was shooting days that I hadn't really prepped for, but luckily Gail had done all the homework in advance. And I knew the show so well because we'd sort of developed it together. So I was able to just step in and shoot the days while he would scout. And then he'd come back and then we were better prepared for each episode. And they eventually decided to let me do a whole episode on my own, just to sort of, grow a little bit more and have that experience, so that went really well as well. And then that gave Gail a whole episode to prep with the other directors. And that went really well. So we did another episode. So in the fifth season, I shot 2 episodes, but I also shot 2 or 3 days of every other episode, which, that was a great place to just get started and really start in a family environment, sort of with a lot of support around me. And then so for the sixth and seventh seasons, everybody really liked that. So we just kind of alternated every other episode, with Gail sort of shooting the beginning and ending episodes of each season,
Hmm.
so he could still kind of have the premiere and the finale of each season, and then we kind of switch back and forth in between.
Now, how do you like to approach scripts when you get them? Like, how do you break them down? Like, what is your approach when you receive a script?
Sure. So, um, on a show like Grace and Frankie, where the look is sort of established, I'm not
Mhm.
really trying to invent anything when I'm reading a script. What I'm doing is reading through it. I'm looking for, um, who's who's sort of whose scene is each scene, like what is each scene about. So what are we really focusing on, what are we paying our most attention to. um, I'm looking for anything that might need some piece of equipment that we don't normally carry. For instance, if there's a specific need for a crane or a car rig or
Mhm.
something that we don't always have on the truck. But I'm really just looking through, seeing what kind of ideas come to my head, but I'm sort of putting all those ideas sort of in a drawer, so to speak. And then when I talk with the director and listen to what the director's keying into, what are they thinking? And then I might pull one of those ideas out if I had one and say, well, since you're interested in this portion of this scene and you've got an idea for that, I also had this idea. Maybe they work together. Um, but I always think of sort of the DP's ideas as sort of like a deck of cards here. Take a pick. If you like one of these cards, great. If not, it doesn't really matter, because it's ultimately it's the director's show. It's their ideas that need to. It's my job to make that
Mhm.
happen visually. So just kind of come up with some ideas, see if there's anything that might be problematic. For instance, we would shoot most of our car scenes we would shoot on stage, right? We'd have green screens all around and do what we call poor man's process lighting, and then they put plates in post of the driving shots, right?
Mhm.
Well, if a script says, they're driving along and then they get out and walk away from the car, well, that's something that's like a red flag for me. Like, oh, we need to either talk about doing this differently or come up with a really solid plan, because in a green screen car driving shot, if you stop and get out of the car and the plate keeps driving, like that doesn't work, or whatever. Like that's the kind of thing that could be oh, I need to make a note of that, and let's circle back and see if we might need to shoot this practically, or come up with a different idea, or is there something we can cut away to, or whatever. Because
Mhm.
that just so basically I was really looking for things that didn't fit in our sort of standard toolbox that we always had with us, if we needed to approach something differently, or come up with some new ideas.
Now, on Grace and Frankie, there's some heavy hitter actors on there. There's Lily Tomlin,
Sure.
Martin Sheen, Jane Fonda, Sam Waterston, uh, sorry, Sam Watterson. Um, was that intimidating or was that educating? What was that like?
um Oddly enough, it wasn't really intimidating, it was very educating. I think that's a good way to put it. um those four actors have been doing this for a long time, and they've been doing it successfully, and
Mm-hmm.
so they've all obviously got something figured out to stick around in showbiz for so long and to be so successful. And I think watching them work was very educational, seeing sort of the gratitude and the kindness that was coming out of those four people, um, and also watching their attention to their own craft, their own job. Jane Fonda watches dailies every day, and that's not a very common thing for actors. But
Mm-hmm.
she watches not only to see what's going on and what's happening, but she's watching her own performance and thinking, oh, I could learn something here. And so even at 80 something years old, she's still paying attention to what she's doing, to learn to how to improve or see what she could do differently or whatever. Like that sort of attention to detail is something that I really respected. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and each one of them had their own characteristics that you could see why, Martin was just so kind and generous to everyone around him. He was always telling stories and had time for everyone. And I think that was an important thing to see, that even someone who's, you might consider an iconic or legendary actor who's been doing it forever, he always had time for anyone to say hello and shake their hand. And, you know, um, Sam would analyze each part of a scene in his own way, and he was it was so educating to watch him dissect why his character is doing X, Y, or Z and what's happening in the scene, to where sometimes he would, we would be doing a shot and his character's action would do one thing and then the camera was doing something else, and it's like, all right, well, we gotta get those two actions together. And it might just be a simple tweak of saying, Sam, what if your chair was facing the other direction? Would that help you out? And he would say, yes, that's exactly what we need. And then he could go on and he would do the scene in this brilliant way. But watching how every action that his character made needed to make sense to him, needed to make sense to his character. And that sort of like following through on every thought that a character would be making, to me, was really impressive. He wasn't just there to say the words that were on the page. He needed to make sure that his character believed each word, and his character thought through, why was his character doing each action. And I thought that was really, so really for each of them, there's really just something to learn from somebody that's been doing it for so long.
Now, in your bio, you mentioned that you feel that the image works on a subconscious level uh, when we're telling stories. So, how can you elaborate on that or explain that?
Yeah. So I think, in Grace and Frankie, the the camera and the lighting's job was sort of to get out of the way of the really great writing and performances, and not draw your attention to, hey, I'm watching a television show,
Mm-hmm.
or hey, there's definitely a light right there outside the window, I can feel it. It was to sort of melt away and get out of the way of the jokes and the performances. But there were times in very subtle ways that we could do things that you might not know you're seeing, but it all adds up with the performance, with the writing, with the music, to work together. So, you know, um, there might be like a time where you might slightly desaturate in the color grade someone's face if they're suddenly, shocked at something. We could just
Mm-hmm.
barely pull the color out, or there was a scene where Jane was in a restaurant or Grace was in a restaurant having a date with um, Peter Gallagher's character, Nick, and she was she was trying to win him back, basically. And so it was really like kind of romantic moment. And I remember she was wearing red, and we kind of pushed the saturation up just a little bit to kind of like put a little bit more life into the moment, so to speak. And that's something that if you didn't know was there, you wouldn't maybe miss it. But as you're watching it, it's like suddenly everything's a little bit more alive. It just kind of like helps the moment work a little bit better. And there are all kinds of things that we would do like that, like maybe a little bit of a vignette so that everything melts just a little bit darker around, and you see the face just a little bit clearer or brighter, or maybe blur the background. You play with the depth of field a little bit. There was a scene in the second to last episode of Lily painting where it was a very emotional scene. It was it was kind of hard to watch, a sad scene, and it was just her alone in her studio. And so I chose to shoot that scene with the lenses wide open, so very shallow depth of field, which we didn't really do very much on the show. And it's not like hit you over the head with it, but it just isolated her just a little bit more, and it made it look, it also happened to look really beautiful, as it was one of my favorite scenes that we did in the series, really. um, but just isolating her just a little bit more in her moment of mental isolation. And I
Mm-hmm.
think those kind of things really add up. If you just think about every scene that way, there might be something that you can do, and maybe there isn't, but I think little tiny suggestions really do work on the subconscious when you're watching something.
Now, you guys switched cameras during the series to meet Netflix 4K requirements. Um, so how, because every camera is going to be a little bit different. So what were some of the challenges that sort of put forward to you guys?
Sure. So when we started, it was 2014, I think, when we were prepping the
Mm-hmm.
first season. And Netflix at the time, and they still do, has a 4K capture requirement. So you have to be capturing your show in 4K, and it has to remain 4K throughout the pipeline. So at the time, I think our options were a Red Dragon, a Sony F55 maybe, and we also looked at a Canon C300 with an external recorder. And that was sort of all that was available. And the external recorder just didn't make any sense. That's just too many things that could go wrong on a full size television set. And we thought the Sony at the time looked kind of clinical. And so we ended up going with the Red camera, and it also was pretty sharp, and we ended up putting nets behind the lenses just as a way to, because when you're shooting, your cast is of a certain age, sharpness is not really your friend when you're trying to photograph people's faces, really. So we had some nets that we would put behind the lens for the first couple of seasons and for every shot, and that kind of helped. But eventually the Canon C300 Mark II came out, and that offered the internal 4K recording, and that was something that Gail had a really good relationship with Canon. He shot a whole episode of House on the 5D, the Canon 5D, which really started it was a part of the beginning, or was a big impetus for the 5D success, really, where people realized you could shoot a television show on this little DSLR. And ever since then, I think he always loved the sensor that Canon had. And so when that C300 Mark II came out, we gave it a try on one of our last episodes of the second season, and everybody really liked how it looked. It has very cinematic, very soft feel to it. Handles skin tones really excellently. It just happens to be in sort of a documentary looking kind of package, but the sensor itself is really, if as a cinematographer, what I care about is the image, and as well as Gail, is the image, and that comes from the sensor. It doesn't come from the body, it doesn't come from the mount, it doesn't come from anything. It comes from the sensor and the lens, really. And so we really liked that trial. So starting the third season, we switched over to the C300, the Canon cameras, and we ditched the nets behind the lenses. We didn't feel that we needed those anymore, and I think the skin tones really improved from that change. And I think that the colors are just a little nicer than what we went from, and over the years, Red's cameras have improved, and the Dragon sort of off in the past or whatever. But I think it really helped the show. It was the right sensor for the show. And as the seasons went by, we just sort of switched out to different Canon cameras as newer ones were available that had different features we liked or whatever. The C700 had a look around, which is an area where the operator can see what's just about to come into the frame. And so that was like a really helpful thing to have when, we put our lighting right up to the edge of every single frame, was almost lighting right up to the edge. And so the camera operators didn't have very much room to pan around or tilt around without catching some equipment. And so that look around gave them the sort of confidence to know when they needed to end a pan, or when they were just about to, and then you don't ruin a take by accidentally getting a light stand in the shot or something.
Yeah. Is there a particular shot during the series that was really difficult to achieve, but you're really proud of the outcome?
Yeah. So this would be, there's quite a few, but one that really comes to mind was when I was still gaffing, and it was in season 4. And there was a scene where Grace was maybe going to break up with Nick, and she said, well, I'm just, this isn't me, what you see every day. This is makeup and all these appliances and things. And she kind of got really upset and stripped off all of her makeup and her hair extensions and everything that she had, and said, this is the real me. This is what's up. And, part of our job on a daily basis was just to try to make, our actors look as great as they could. And so that's a very vulnerable moment for an actress
Mhm.
to wipe off a bunch of makeup and say, this is the real me. But, we still wanted her to, it's a big moment for the character and the actress. So I think that the balance we struck in photographing that scene, it was just very powerful, very emotional. And I think it worked really well. And so that the difficulty there is sort of the balance of how do you maintain the look of the show,
Mhm.
keep the character the character Grace lit in a way that does tell that story of she's really exposing herself, but still sort of taking care of everything, from a lighting standpoint that we did. So while that doesn't on the face, you might just watch it and say, "Oh, that was a really emotional scene." The lead up to that and the preparing for that, I think that was sort of a difficult line to walk. And again, that was when I was gaffing with Gail shooting, but we approached everything together as a team then.
Interesting. Now, I have one last question for you. We've been stuck in this pandemic for 2 years. Depending on where you are in the world, some people are stuck indoors, some people are, um, under quarantine for various reasons. Is there a show or a movie you've discovered on streaming networks that you think people should check out?
Well, one that I found that I really enjoyed, and it's short, so it's not going to take up too many hours, and I think a lot of people have seen it, was Queen's Gambit.
Oh yeah.
Um, I thought it looked so beautiful. It matches the time period, the content. I think I think that the shots are all very well considered. Nothing's an accident on that show, and
Hmm.
that to me, and it's all very well done. So to me, that makes for a really great television watching experience. It was sort of more like a 6 hour movie, or however many hours it was, 8 hour
Right.
movie.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Absolutely, it's a joy.
Thanks. And that's it for this week. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for all our latest courses. And of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Raquel. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.